the discovery of the century awaits, dear viewers. This time, Robert Gibson, XJ, and I will dive deep into another Weird Tales offering, The Two Men Who Murdered Each Other, by Valma Clark. A teacher and a journalist, our author submitted many a tale to all sorts of magazines over her lifetime, but her first was the very work we are covering tonight. The story begins with our protagonist, a relic hunter named Claude Van Nuys. I will probably be mispronouncing all of these names, but what can you do? Though he is looking for something utterly unrelated within the trove of the Cape Cod, an antique store on the King's Highway, he stumbles onto an ancient replicas of Greek vases. One of them, a half vase depicting Athena, sets the tale before us in motion. The craftsmanship impresses our narrator greatly, who seeks out the elusive creator, one named Mr. Twinning. Unable to take a car to his destination, Van Nuys meets the scholar right as stormy weather shows its ferocious features. The vase maker, an older gentleman whose mental health deteriorates as the novelette progresses, insists that our protagonist spends the night at his house. What follows is a confession of a man living with his demons, a tale of jealousy, of rivalry, and great discoveries. Before the secluded life of a hermit, Mr. Twinning worked as an archaeologist working with his close friend and colleague by the name of Paul Lutz. Though their professional relationship was somewhat amicable and an incident in Greece changed everything. Discovery of, now this is a really good one, uh, Euphronius. I have no idea how you say that. Art piece, the before mentioned vase, whose replica astounded Van Nuys initially. Lutz wanted to have the grand object for himself, paying for both parts of the antique with his own coin, while Twinning was dead set on using the vase to prove his theory that would shake the foundation of our understanding of the ancient Greeks. Both men are stranded at sea a few weeks later due to a shipwreck, and Twinning believes that in his rage he had killed Lutz, and has been living with that sin ever since. Years later, Van Nuys meets a stranger who reminds him of this tale and turns the entire narrative upside down as he is faced with an incredible dilemma of the two men who murdered each other. There you go. That is the tale. That is what transpired within the story without much spoiler. Um, if you wish to, you can find this story anywhere. We can definitely have a link in the description down below so that you can read it yourself and come up with your own conclusion. And I'll reserve to say what I thought about the story after I gave a chance to our my astute co-hosts to speak their piece. So, XJ, why don't you start us off today? How did you feel about today's session? Today's offering.
Um, yeah, it's totally not my kind of story at all. Yeah. So first of all, I think uh, the way the story is written itself is very fragmentary. There are certain parts of the story which obviously, because this is all in the author's head, it makes complete and total sense to the author, but it would make no sense to somebody outside of the author's mind. And the very first example I would give is the little scene in the curiosity shop, where the protagonist was looking through stuff and then he saw this painting, and he was like, but this guy must really know who all about his Greek stuff. And then all of a sudden there was a shop girl who have totally been absent from the description up until now suddenly popped in and say, oh, you mean that guy? Yes, yes. And I'm like, how would the shop girl know what guy the protagonist is referring to? Because because the conversation, the dialogue, the exclamation that the protagonist gave was had no indication he was referring to the painter at all, and the shop girl just seemed to magically know what the protagonist is, who the protagonist is talking about, and it's pretty much peppered throughout the whole story. And by the way, um, I was totally thrown off the loop when the author described the painting as a broken painting. I was literally expecting the frame to be broken in some places and blah blah blah, and it turns out that it was just because the lower part of the portrait was unfinished, so to speak. Uh, and it carries on throughout the whole of the story. It just keeps jumping from place to place, paragraph to paragraph. And some of the events are just like really unbelievable to me. Like they in one of the accounts of Mr. Twinnings, they were midway in the Atlantic when the ship struck a reef, and I'm like, a reef in the middle of the Atlantic? They must be near some kind of land. Uh, and there was no indication of such. And then the behavior of the crew was just utterly unbelievable to me. The captain was at one side sobbing his guts out, and then the chaos was just described with a couple of lines of crewmen fighting each other for lifeboats, and then they came by another big burly sailor who was again sobbing his eyes out, and I just thought that to be really really odd, because I would expect like the crew of a ship to be a bit more disciplined, and if they are not that disciplined, then the chaos should be described a little bit further. Overall, my impression is that the author just wants to focus on the drama between Twinnings and his friend, and that little bit of a rivalry going on between the two of them, to the point where I thought it was gossipy, like like the protagonist somehow or the other magically again happened to have dinner with this guy called Burke, who just happens to be the guy that Twinnings thought he killed. And and what does Claude Van Nuys do? He brings Burke to Twinnings with the express purpose, literally written in the story, that he just wants to see the drama between the two of them. And I'm like, wow. Maybe this is the kind of story that will strike some readers, but it's really not my cup of tea at all. Not my story. Yeah.
All right. Well, after that glowing review, Robert, what did you think of the tale?
I think I'm not such a hard-headed realist as XJ, because a lot of XJ's points seem quite cogent when I hear them from him, but they're not the sort of things I would think of myself. That's probably because if I'm making the effort to read a story, I like to get my money's worth by allowing the author to, as it were, hypnotize me into seeing the story in its own terms. There are other things I'd like to say about the story which are not at all analytical. Um, the moral implications of the story very strongly in favor of the doctrine that it's intentions that matter rather than deeds. That is to say, these men both think of themselves, well, in particular, the one with more of a conscience thinks of himself as a murderer, even though he actually literally isn't. And you start to wonder. I think you're meant to think, well, because he did intend to murder this chap, even though actually he didn't. In a way, he is a murderer, and that brings one to this idea I just mentioned, that it's the intention that matters and not the deed. And so that, in the sight of God and your own conscience, you are a murderer if you think you are. And that's a very harsh doctrine. But maybe in some ways it's true, although perhaps not for all faults, because when you think of the fault of cowardice, it's a different thing. In that one, the act is all that matters, and the intention. You can think yourself, you can tremble like a coward, but if you don't act like one, then you're not. If you see what I mean. So that's the opposite kind of argument.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's the sort of abstract moral strength of the story. It gives food for thought in that way. I'd also like to say that to me, the story gave a good sense of place. I was interested in the description of these places in Cape Cod. I don't know if the author just worked that out of a book or if he's been there himself. And the title, I thought, The Two Men Who Murdered Each Other, is good for raising expectations. You think, well, that's the story I want to read. And it's quite important to raise those expectations when you've got a very peaceful beginning to the story. It is a very peaceful and almost humdrum opening to a tale, which I rather enjoyed. So there we are. Those are the main points I would like to make. I'm not minimizing the criticisms that XJ made. I can see that they are probably cogent ones. To be absolutely sure about it, I'd have to go over the story again myself, but they have the ring of truth to me. But it's not the sort of thing that I would have noticed myself. So am I lucky that I can ignore these things and thereby enjoy stories which I wouldn't enjoy so much otherwise? Probably am.
There you go. Okay, I'll give you my thoughts. So I like the story overall. I think it does have problems. It does have issues in certain places, but for a first outing of an author in a in a magazine that was at this point it was selling out on the stands by the point of this issue. It's a good story. It's a good first outing, so to speak. It has a lot of interesting conundrums. I actually like the fact that the two men get to meet one another, because most stories would end on dun dun dun, the guy's alive, and now everything that we knew about the story has been put upside down, and that's the natural conclusion the author decides to go with, and we don't go further. But this protagonist is proactive. Whether it's for good or bad reasons, that doesn't really matter to me. His motivation, bringing these two people, uh, actually makes it better for the fact that he's horrible and that he wants to see the two of them have like an emotional struggle against one another. And it's even more fun that that doesn't happen and he gets disappointed, so he doesn't get to see that drama. So actually, in fact, that I like the flawed protagonist that we've got, and the entirety of the story having this umph of just emotional distress between the two I wouldn't even call them um, protagonists. I guess they are the antagonists because nobody's good in this story. No, not a single person is a
Mm.
good person. Because two people try to kill each other, and one dude is just there being like, okay, so what's gonna happen next? So they're all terrible. But that's what makes it fun. It makes it interesting to follow terrible people, because most of us we live pretty mundane lives. We wake up, we go get a coffee, we start moving about you know the house. We get dressed and go to work, and then the most exciting thing that happens to you during work is maybe you'll have like a 5 minute break and you'll talk about some with somebody at work, and they'll say like, "Oh man, I played Warhammer 40K Bolt Gun last night." And you're like, "Oh really? How did that go?" And that's your day, right? But this dude, he goes to this spooky house, right? He gets told this crazy mystery during his working hours. And then years later, he meets another crazy dude again during his working hours. And he has this amazing experience of, just getting all the story together. If my working hours were like this, I would never write. I'd just live my fantastical life. You know, Sounds very exciting. Um, as far as the moments that I enjoyed best, I would say the fact that there's nothing supernatural about this story
Mm.
is its biggest strength. Because even though there isn't anything supernatural or any crazy fantasy or sci-fi element to it, it was still an interesting plot to follow. It may have been benign in some areas, very well. No, I wouldn't call it benign. Or how would I say it? Um, Cliche, maybe bland a little in some aspects, but the main core of the story, the mystery, was interesting. Now its resolution isn't as interesting, but it had elements of a movie we have discussed before on this podcast very briefly. It's called The Lighthouse, and I felt that this movie had this short story had a similar tone to it in places, and for that I must commend the author. What I cannot commend them for, and these are my issues, which maybe only I have seen, but the somewhat anti-Semitic nature of the antagonist's description that transpired. I didn't really understand what was the reasoning of mentioning the character's religion besides basically trying to characterize him as someone who would have these traits. Because let's look at Lutz. He likes money. He will betray anything for money. He is he's handsome but devilish, right? He only cares about himself and profit. And when that are all his traits, and then for some reason he's mentioned twice to be Jewish is very strange to me. And maybe it's the times, maybe the author had something else in mind. I mean, we can't ask Valma, obviously at this point, but that irked me. That wasn't
Mm.
but I just didn't really understand the intention, and I was hoping it wasn't malevolent, but the facts kind of seem to be contrary to that. It does seem to be a painting of caricature there, which is sad to see.
Mm.
Otherwise, I had no issues. I mean some pacing problems, but honestly, again, I must stress this out. First time story, no supernatural twist, interesting mystery, drama,
Mm.
interesting conclusion. That is way more than a lot of writers can say about their first published short story.
Mm. Yeah. Just one little point to add. I hadn't known, and I still don't know because it might be invented in the story, whether these some of these Greek vase painters are known by name. Uh, Euphronius, probably an invented name, but whether he is or not, the idea that you actually might have a name for the painter of a ancient Greek vase is quite interesting. It's not a ridiculous idea, but it's a new one on me. Anyway, that's by the way.
Yeah. Um, was there anything that you did enjoy about the story, actually, or was it kind of an all rounder uh, disappointment?
Well, I wouldn't call it a disappointment as such, just that it's not my kind of story. Like I said, some people,
Whatever you'd like to call it. I mean, I'm
some,
not saying was there anything enjoyable
uh,
in it.
the first part of the story, the description of the curiosity shop was pretty good. I thought, like Rob had pointed out, some of the locations were quite well described. Like where was it that they in Greece that they
Greece.
went to Greece, where they went to pull out those fragments of pottery and stuff like that. Those are pretty good. Uh, yeah, just not really my kind of story at all. So, um, I mean, the drama for the sake of drama is
What
yeah.
What do you mean by drama for the sake of drama? You don't think there was an underlying reason between the two of them to have this conflict? You think the
Well,
conflict was shallow?
so first of all, I think the the structure of the story is so obviously crafted to heighten the drama between these two men, and emotional struggle they have between themselves. So much so that, first of all, the two characters are like caricatures. They are like very extreme representative of that particular archetype. You have the scholar who is very defensive about puts knowledge and contribution to history and all that stuff into in one concentrated form. And then you have the other, who is another archetype, stereotype, if you will, of somebody who just wants this stuff for himself. And then you have the struggle
Mm.
between the two, and it just seems to me like the events, um, the flow of the story, the events, the pace, everything is just constructed around bringing this drama up and then to a clash. And to me, that's like, again, some people might enjoy that. It's just not for me. I prefer my drama to happen organically, like two brothers who have issues with each other. You know, it's not the depth of the.
I wonder what you're referencing.
Yeah, which one am I referencing to? It's not the depth of the drama that I have an issue with. It's that it's so obviously set up to have that, and that's just
I
not
think,
for me.
yeah, I think I can explain that side of it. Actually, it's like the cosmological anthropic principle, which is to say that it's all very well being astonished at the fact that the physical constants of our universe and all that are just happen to be what they are, but and they just happen to be such that life can evolve. But the answer to that is that it has to be that way because we wouldn't be there to comment on it otherwise. So similarly, you might have a plot principle for stories, and you might say, well, it's all been set up, and the answer is, well, yes, but it had to be because otherwise there wouldn't be a story, and we wouldn't be reading it, and we wouldn't be talking about it. You see, so stories are just the occasional crystallization of set upness out of a infinity of random events. So any story is going to be set up. That's my annoying little comment on that.
No, not at all. I
Mm.
mean, like I said, again, this is probably the kind of story that some people would like. It's just not the kind of story I would like, because it's just everything just seems too trite, just to like set up to drive things along this particular direction, and the
Mm,
construction of the set is too obvious. Let's put it that way.
mm. It is pretty obvious. I give you that. Yeah, doesn't bother me because I just gulp down whatever I'm being uh,
Bad.
fed, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be very hard not to make your setup obvious when you're. This is the big issue with the story. Actually, it's way too ambitious for the 19 pages that it's got. It's got these set pieces. It's got this places that they go to. There's shipwreck. There's like a couple of years later, there's the resolution between the two. The drama contained within is worthy of a novel situation, right? Whereas what we have is 19 pages, and because of
Mm,
this mm, format and the daring desire to tell the story fully, perhaps that's why the setup itself was so obvious.
mm.
uh a description just went through my head, and I'm thinking like this is like Days of Our Lives, like a soap opera to me.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, 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 definitely. This is a dramatic event that transpires within the story and then culminates. I, I mean, it's. I think a lot of.
I could totally see this as like a long running thread in a daytime television series like Days of Our Lives.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, yeah, you could definitely. For
Yeah.
sure.
Well, yeah,
Yeah. Okay. Well. Hmm.
yeah. I've said all I wanted to say, I guess.
Okay. What
Mm.
about you, Robert? Do you have anything that
Yeah,
you wish to?
no, I think I've said my fill.
Okay. I'll just mention one last thing. I do believe that Valma Clark has written more stories within the repertoire of the Weird Tales magazine. So if we ever stumble upon upon her work again, I'll give it a check. That it's not the same, dramaturgy kind of dramatical story. Because I think, um, I don't think there's. Well, actually, you know what? This spawns a very interesting question. What does a story that's based on a soap opera slash dramatic intention, XJ, what would it need to pique your interest, if anything? Could it work at all for you? Or do you feel like this genre is just completely off the books for you?
Can you repeat the question?
What would be the defining feature or the defining change or something that could make you enjoy a story such as this, if anything?
Um, so I remember being very absorbed with some Brazilian omnibus way back in the day. It was like we're talking about a soap opera, 600 episodes altogether. And I think I watched
Okay.
half of them when I was a kid. Um, what it's not so much, like I said, it's not so much the drama, the intensity of the drama or the type of drama. It's just that if the if the construction of the set is too obvious, like everything is leading to a drama, having drama for the sake of drama, then it just like washes over me. I remember
Mm, mm.
those Brazilian soap operas as being a lot more natural. There is context to why everything is happening. Um, One thing led organically to another. So if the perhaps, as you said, if there is actually enough depth for the drama to slowly be led into its conclusion, it would have been better. But yeah, just just as long as it's not so obvious. I think the running theme to myself actually is that if the author doesn't make it too obvious that it's a setup, it's a thing coming from the author itself, I'm okay. Once my suspension of disbelief is interrupted, then there really is no going back for me. And by the way, that's actually why, even though I really like science fiction, I don't watch a lot of science fiction movies, because I just get interrupted and taken out of this movie all the time when I see wrong stuff. Yeah.
So you can't stand contrivance. That's
Yes. Things like that. Once I notice things like that, it brings me out of the story, and my suspension of disbelief is broken, and it's very hard to regain that. So basically, I, without meaning to, I only give authors one chance at a story.
And as soon as the setup is revealed, you're like,
Yeah, pretty much. Most of the time,
Okay.
it's like, oh my god, no, please. Yeah.
I gotta say, I think I enjoyed this story the most out of all three of us, but we'll see when it comes to the reviews. That are
I'm going
infinitely coming.
to cop out and say I'm not gonna give a score. It's
It's ungraded.
Yeah, it's ungraded, because obviously this is not my kind of story, but I recognize that some people might like it, as perhaps Nikki has shown. I mean, if
There's
it's
some idiots like me who gonna judge.
I mean, if it's your kind of story, then it's your kind of story, right? Yeah, nobody needs to justify why they like a story or dislike a story. Yeah,
No, but I mean,
yeah. No offense
that's kind of what we
intended.
do here.
No offense intended.
Yes.
Well, I do go to more lengths to explain why I dislike a story than if I like a story. That's for sure. Yeah.
Robert, what grade would you give this story?
maybe a 7.
7. Okay.
Yeah.
So Robert and I give the same score, 7. However, um, I will bring it down to a 3 if this anti-Semitic stuff prevails in her writing. If this is not just some weird, fit of her trying to sort of, oh, I'm gonna explain this character in this way to give you the shorthand or whatever, right? Like if the next story starts with like, all right, this Jew, I'll be like, all right, I'm out. Sorry, Valma.
Yeah, one sample is not enough, because I mean you could say that it was an anti-sailor story, because the sailors turn out to be pretty useless because they keep crying and so on.
Yeah, they keep
Yes.
crying. Yeah. I mean, what you can clearly see is that Valma has never been on a ship or doesn't really know much about the Navy, right? Because that wouldn't, as XJ said very astutely, yeah. If any sailor was acting like this, none of us would be going anywhere on ships. Yeah. So, anyways, thank you all for listening. Let us know if you've read the story, what you thought of it. As a sailor, if any sailors are watching, do you regularly cry on duty? Like, let us know. Anyway.
Only when the ship strikes a rift in the middle of the Atlantic.
Right, that's the protocol with the Seawolf index. Okay, right, everybody, thank you so much for joining us. Subscribe, like, send this to all your friends and colleagues and loved ones. Have a good night, and have a good
Good night.
day, and have a good time.
Right.
Bye bye.
Bye.